It's Nikki and welcome back to Live a Little, your cozy corner of the internet where we explore all of the in-between parts of life, the messy parts, the unpolished parts, and the unfiltered parts where you may not feel like you have someone to talk about them with, but we do it all judgment-free around here. Before I get into this episode, I just want to issue a trigger warning. I'm going to be discussing themes of weight and my relationship with food and eating disorders. So if you struggle with those things or are triggered by them, then this one may not be for you, but that's okay. Come back next week or watch one of the old episodes that you may not have listened to yet, and I will see you next time. You can always come back to it when you feel a little bit more able. I really wanted to talk about the topic of control and how it healthily and not so healthily manifests itself in life, and how as humans we are always looking for little parts of control or things that we can hold on to that feel like ours, especially when maybe circumstances outside of us feel out of our control. And if you have followed my journey, you know that for me, a lot of, if not all of my life since I was 6 years old when I got diagnosed with my condition hasn't been in my control. You know, when I became sick at 6, my appearance wasn't in my control, my physical health wasn't in my control, my mental well-being became very out of my control, my childhood was out of my control, my day-to-day, what I was spending my day-to-days doing, I wasn't playing with other children and, you know, living a free-spirited, fun and happy childhood. I was in hospital. And so all of the things that I knew to be true at that point that felt like were mine and in my control very quickly were pulled from under me. And that was incredibly difficult. You know, it was something that was like an unforeseen circumstance, which made it even harder, because that's where that, you know, as soon as that control starts drifting away from you, and it's especially something that you could have never foreseen happening, is when I think you clutch onto anything that will give you that sense of self and, you know, ability to feel like you can hold on to something even tighter, even if it's something that isn't so healthy. And so, you know, there's parts in my life and things in my life where I have sought control and they have been healthy things. For example, when my appearance started changing, I found makeup and I found beauty and I found fashion. And even now, those are, you know, healthy things that I use to make me feel more like I have something to hold on to, which is mine. And I think we all need things that are ours, that we feel like we wholly have. I'm going to be saying control so much in this video, but, you know, it's so important to have autonomy wholly over certain things. And because I didn't have that over my body, it was maybe I can change the color of lipstick I wear, and that is me controlling that and making that decision and carrying that through. Or it's me dyeing my hair. You know, from 14 years old, I dyed my hair rose gold, and then I dyed it hot pink, and now I've got it this copper color, and that was control for me over my appearance. And then even like the outfit you choose to wear each day, even if it may not inherently feel like control, it is, because you're making that decision for yourself. And I think that is what the baseline of it is all about, is you have autonomy over what is happening in your life, essentially day to day, or more drastic decisions from big or small. It's, you know, basically it's control to me is the having the option of a choice and having the option of a decision that you can make and you can choose. And from a very early age, I lost that in many, many, many ways, if not all ways, that it just left me feeling incredibly helpless and out of control. And so, yeah, it crept in unhealthy ways for me to try and regain that sense of security, for sure. You know, I didn't grow up with routine from 6-year-old onwards. I didn't grow up with foreseen circumstances. And I was always, I guess, even before I became really unwell, I did like that sense of like control. I always felt like I thrived and liked just knowing and planning things and knowing what to expect. I never really liked things feeling like, oh, it might go this way or it might go that way. Like, I've never been very good at being spontaneous, but I was definitely more outgoing than I am now. I think that's, partly to do with just my condition and how it's changed me as a person. But I also just think when something like control feels like safety in your life and feels like a given, you don't realize how much you're lacking it. It's like anything in your life, big or small. If you suddenly feel like you're going through something and you feel down or you're struggling with depression, you feel that loss of that thing so much more deeply. And so I think, from a very early age, I always liked being able to know what to expect, but it definitely changed in me feeling like I was quite highly strung and tightly wound and didn't like just doing things with no plan. I think that also comes from, so much of my life has been like, we have to plan for the worst and we need a plan A and a plan B and a plan C, and like everything has felt like a fight or flight mode that I operate in. And if there is no plan, then there is no safety net. And if there's no safety net, then if shit hits the fan, we need these things to make us feel able to enjoy life more. And so I feel like, from a very early age, control has felt like safety, as it is for all of us. It could be in so many different ways. It could be, you needing control in yourself because you didn't have that in your body and trying to find it in unhealthy ways or healthy ways. It could be you needing control in maybe work. If you have struggled, if you've maybe just lost your job, that need for control and worry about stability the next time you get a new job is even bigger, and that fear is even bigger. And so I guess the whole idea of control is just like feeling like you need something to hold on to in order to keep you sane, essentially, especially in times of your life where it has been completely taken away in an unforeseen circumstance. And it's never come from wanting power. I think control, of course, there is elements of that, but I think for a lot of us, the idea of control came from needing some stability and some routine to have in your life to feel protected, I guess. And from a very early age, my body wasn't in my control. The one thing that you should have like autonomy over wasn't. I was being cut into, I was being spoken about like a third person in a room by doctors and nurses as, being a problem, and how I needed to be cut into, and I was inspected like this object rather than a human. And from a very early age, it was me signing consent forms for surgeries and things that I didn't want to do. And it was always like placed on me, like, you do have a choice here, you can do this or this, but like it was never a choice. It was like, which bad will feel less bad. It could be like, do you want a severe operation where the likelihood of regrowth is lower, but it's 4 months of recovery and it's a 12-hour surgery? Or do you want a massive scar on your face? Or do you want the smaller option, but it could be less successful, and it could be this and it could be that, but the recovery may not be as bad, but the success rate may not be as high. So from a very early age, I was presented what people, I think, thought were choices, but they never were. It was just me having to choose out of two bad things. And at such an early age, the only choices you feel like you should be having to make are, what clubs you want to do, or who your friends are at school, or the most simple things. A lot of your childhood, you're spoken for and protected, or at least you should be, by your caregivers, your parents and your loved ones. And so there's very little you actually have to be aware of controlling things, because a lot of it is done for you. You're told what to do, you're told what is right and wrong, you're told the solution. Everything is linear and it's simple. And where it becomes difficult is when things in life aren't linear and they aren't simple, because then your brain can't make sense of them. So from as long as I can remember, I feel like my brain has short-circuited to not so healthy coping mechanisms, for me to try and make sense of the things, or even just cope with the things that was going on around me, in order to quite literally just survive them. I think, as humans, our brain goes into survival mode and will quite literally do whatever possible to get us through them, or just keep operating and functioning. So as unhealthy as those things may be, it's almost what your body is almost trying to do to keep you going, essentially. And that's where my slippery slope with my relationship with food and my relationship with my weight and eating became my thing from like 10 years old, very early. That was my control. And now being older, and also being not on the other side of recovery, because I personally don't believe you can ever be fully recovered from an eating disorder, which is what I had. I do think that niggle in your brain is always there. It's like a box that gets opened, and I don't think that box can ever be fully shut, but I think you just get better and more able to, you get better at, I guess, like learning how to like ease it back shut. Whereas before it was like wide open, and there was nothing I could do to shut the box of negative spirals and the negative self-talk and everything, the patterns and, the behavior that comes with having an eating disorder and how it changes you as a person. So I think for me, growing up with my medical condition has essentially shaped everything for me, appointments, procedures, waiting rooms, adults have made decisions for me my whole life, or my medical condition has completely been in the driver's seat of my life. And so it was something that became my safety, and I think that's what control is it's safety, and it's something that you can protect and hold. When I would always, growing up, get like fixated on certain foods. Like I'd become like obsessed with, I don't know, like I remember I had an obsession with like cheddar cheese, and it was like every day I literally could not go without eating cheddar cheese. It was like, it would be on toast, it would be in a sandwich, it would be on pasta. It's like I just could not go the day without it, because it felt like a safe food. And it's not like I ate loads of different types of foods growing up. I'm half Indian, half Greek, so I have grown up with lots of different types of food. So it wasn't that thing of like, I only grew up with these like safe foods and these like simple foods. It was more that I just liked being like, oh, this is something I like, so I'm going to eat that every day. Like we all do it. We hyperfixate on things. It could be like a show, a food, like whatever it is. And we just eat that till we get sick of it. But I did that quite a lot growing up. And I was a real creature of habit. I liked eating the same things every day. And so that's like my first memory of like eating and like control, but it never really felt like anything more than me asking my mum for a ham sandwich like every day for school, if I ever was getting into school, or like, at home. I liked eating the same things and knowing what to expect. But yeah, I think, the older I got, I tried to search for something solid and something measurable in my life, and something that I could manage, and that became food, and that became my weight. And it was in no way an appearance thing. I think eating disorders get a real bad rap for being about appearance and people just wanting to be thin, and that's only one type of eating disorder, is just the way it manifests itself in that. There are so many different types, and no two eating disorders and person's experience with one is the same. But for me, it manifested in, not because I wanted to look a certain way. I guess maybe part of that was that it was me being able to control a part of my appearance, but I was doing that with makeup and my outfits and things already. It came from the fact it was trackable, and it had rules, and it had structure, and it had a sense of control when everything else in my life felt unpredictable. Essentially, that's what it was, is that it was reliable, basically, and it felt like ownership, retaking ownership of myself, retaking ownership of my body. And it was like my little secret in a warped way. It was just something that felt like it was completely mine. And when your body starts to feel like it belongs to everyone else around you, especially doctors and your condition, then you try and find that in anything that you can. And so I need to say this carefully, but because I never want to romanticize, what an eating disorder is seen as. I feel like there's a lot of inaccurate portrayals of it, like in media or in shows and things like that. But I think, seeing a scale going down and seeing my body change and become, thinner and thinner, my brain treated that like an achievement in a twisted way. And it was almost like collecting like a medal. It's like I could never it was like, okay, great, I've got to this number now, but there's still like this number I want to get to. You're striving for a number that you're never going to be happy or satisfied with. Or if you get there, you're like, well done, pat on the back, but it's never enough. And that's when things become incredibly unhealthy, because then you become unhealthily underweight, or you become like, it is very hard to, I think, calorie count or track your weight in a healthy way. And if people are able to do it, then great. But for me, my mind became obsessed with numbers and scales. The scary part as well, I think, is that it doesn't just affect food, it affects your priorities and it warps your sense of self. I was a completely different person while I had my eating disorder, and you think you're gaining control, but your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller until all you can think about is food, weight, the absence of food, what you're next going to eat or not eat, the next rule and the next decision. I have had my weight fluctuate all of my life because I'd be nil by mouth before an operation. So you're not eating for like 7 hours before you're going to have a surgery. So that's already me telling myself like this regimented thing of like, okay, I don't eat for 7 hours before a surgery. So that's already warping your brain in a certain way, because you have to be nil by mouth before a surgery. So that was a thing. And then after, if I was really unwell or on a lot of medication, it would suppress my appetite, or I just wouldn't be hungry, or I'd be so swollen that I wouldn't be able to eat. So all of these things were making me either lose weight or do active things where it was like, okay, I won't be able to eat, or I can't eat, or I'm going to lose weight. And they became almost systematic things that I expected every time I had a surgery. And because I was having a surgery so often, I got into this negative like spiral of knowing that every time I got into this, like, I'm used to now having to like not eat before things and like be aware of the fact that I'm like not allowed to eat. And so I think from a very early age, I was just very aware of like, food and not being able to eat certain things or not being well enough to, and things like that. And when I used to go to America for medical treatment, they would put me on steroids after my surgeries because steroids help with swelling and bringing down swelling more quickly. But the thing with steroids is that they make you so hungry. They make you like ravenous, like you want to eat everything in your path. You are just so hungry. And I'd never experienced anything like it, because the thing was, majority of that time I wasn't even actually hungry. Like my body wasn't, there was no signs that my body was hungry, but it was like this urge that I had to eat everything, and I was never full, and it was never enough. And so it would be this thing where I would then eat way too much while I'd be on steroids, completely again out of my control. I'd be like, I don't even want to eat this, slice of bread right now, or this, whatever it may be right now, bowl of cereal. But my body just my mind won't stop fixating on the fact that I'm so hungry. Like, it's like an insatiable, like, need to eat, that I would just eat so much after these surgeries once I was able to, and I was on these steroids. So it was already like these extremes where it was like, okay, I'm like essentially starving myself and having to before a operation, like hours before. And then I go into not eating and dropping quite a bit of weight because I'm unwell and frail to eat. And then I'm putting on a lot of weight in an extreme way and noticeably gaining weight because I just cannot stop eating. So it was then this vicious cycle where then as soon as I'd get off the steroids, because I felt so out of control of my body and I hated that I was like gaining this weight and also felt so swollen and out of control of my body already. And the fact that I knew I didn't want to eat and I knew that it was only the steroids, but I couldn't change anything. I still had to take them because I was swollen, and that was another issue, and I needed to recover. And so it became this spiral where every 6 to 8 weeks when I'd go to America, in between when I was off steroids till my next surgery, I would not eat, or I'd try and eat less because I was like, okay, I need to lose that weight because I know I'm going to be regaining weight. But that all came from a sense of me trying to reclaim control. It's like for 3 weeks, I'd completely lost any sense of control in my body and in my appearance. Everything felt, like poison. I was putting steroids in my body that felt like poison. That in these 3 weeks, I need to not eat, be more mindful about not eating so that I can lose weight. So then when it happens again, the impact doesn't feel so big. And I only just get back to the weight that I was, while I was on steroids, if that makes sense. And so I'd say that was my first noticeable unhealthy habit with food. But then it became not just something that related to surgery. It was just every day I was consumed by the thought of food. And if you followed me for a while, you know that I love baking. And a question I used to get all the time was how do you stay so slim? Which is a question you should never ask someone. But how do you stay so slim when you bake all the time? And it's because I was eating vicariously through baking. It didn't start that way, but when I started having disordered eating and an unhealthy relationship with food, or the lack of food that I was eating, baking became my way that I felt safe, because I would bake biscuits and all of these things. And I was I feel like I'm eating it, even though I'm not going to eat one bite of these cookies I've just made. And then I felt like I was eating vicariously through other people. I'd give my friends all a cookie, or I'd give my dad an extra big slice of cake, unbeknownst to me at the time that I was doing these things. Now I can see it in hindsight, obviously, with a slightly more healthy brain when it comes to that stuff. Because I was you're eating for me as well. I bake the thing, I don't eat the thing, but you're eating it for yourself and me, if that makes sense. So baking then became a sort of unhealthy thing for myself too, because it became a disguise of oh, I love food, I love cooking, which I did, I loved it. But then it became more about trying to be this cover up for how there isn't a problem, because someone who doesn't want to eat surely wouldn't be baking all the time. I think I was so worried about losing control when it came to my eating habits and things like that. I think because I was so young, I was literally 10 years old when some of the habits started, that I don't really think I ever understood what an eating disorder was. And I was the last person that was going to label myself with something, because I was a child. I was literally a child. I'd obviously heard of eating disorders before, or seen them portrayed in shows and things, but I didn't want to label myself with anything, because God had I been labelled enough with stuff and told that I've got enough stuff wrong with me that I didn't want to add to that. But I was seeing a therapist at the time. It was at my hospital, and note to self, never go to hospital somewhere that is already where a lot of your trauma comes from for therapy. It's like going to the place that has traumatized you for therapy is literally so counterintuitive, and none of the therapy that I had at hospital ever helped. But I was already going to therapy, and I was in between going to America for treatment. And I remember going to see my therapist, and we'd spoken about, how I cope with my needle phobia, and how I cope with chronic pain, and just the circumstances of my life, and low mood, and all of these things. But this was a completely new thing we'd never spoken about, and I was so anxious to even bring it up, because it felt like this dirty little secret and my safe thing. It was I can control this is mine. It's all of us, when we have this secret that's only ours, you feel guilty about it, but then you're also oh, it's there's a tiny bit of it's safety. I think it's completely and utterly safety. And so I remember at the end of our session saying to her that, I'm really worried. I think I might have an issue with food, or an issue with eating. I don't know what it is, and maybe it's not a problem. Maybe it is normal, which it wasn't. I learned very quickly. But I just can't stop thinking about my weight, and can't stop weighing myself. And I can't bring myself to put on weight. And basically I said that it's this is food, and the lack of food and my weight is what is consuming my every moment of day. From the moment I wake up to the moment I go to sleep, all I could think about, it consumed me. All I could think about was food. It became my obsession. But just my weight, even, it just became my obsession. My mum said around that time that I completely lost interest in everything else. So it's I'd bake because of how it would overshadow my problem, which was my eating disorder. But I used to love makeup, and I was disinterested by makeup and anything else that were like my newfound hobbies, because my new hobby and my new obsession became food. So I remember speaking to her about it, and she said, okay, well, I just want you to see a dietitian and, get weighed and get checked over and all of these things. And essentially that was like me opening up like the Pandora's box to then my mum having to become aware to, because I was a child, obviously you have to tell you the guardian, like if it's especially something that could be harming you. My mum was finally told and made aware of this thing that felt like, I also was like, I didn't want it to be, it felt like another problem. And for so much of my life, even now I deal with it, I'm trying to work through it. I deal with feeling like a burden, and my problems being the center of like my family's universe because they've had to be. And so this felt like another problem and another issue and another like difficult circumstance. I also didn't want to make my parents aware of it because it felt like this is another thing that they're now going to have to deal with and worry about. So obviously my therapist had to tell my mum, and my mum went with me to the dietitian. And the dietitian was really scary and really fear-mongering and like not very nice. I remember like bawling my eyes out crying after the session, and even my mum like says, yeah, he was not a nice guy. Like I remember he made me run through like what I eat each day, and I lied about, how much I was eating because I wasn't eating this amount. But I remember being like, oh, at lunch I have like a bagel, and he was like, you can't eat bagels. Bagels have holes in them. They're not like calorie dense enough. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Yeah, so that dietitian traumatized me, let's say, and really wasn't very friendly, let's say, and warm, especially being a child that was learning that they had an eating disorder. So yeah, it was just all very like fear-mongering and like scare tactics, I think, to try and scare me into eating. And that is honestly the worst thing what I've learned is that is the worst thing you can do for anyone, whether it be an eating disorder or depression or any mental problem, because it is a mental problem, is to try and scare them into trying to get well, or trying to scare them into, especially for me, eating more than anything, because I wanted help. I was being consumed every moment of the day with these thoughts, and I didn't want to live like that anymore. And it's like anything, being an addict, whatever it may be. I know it's not linear, but unless you decide I want help, I need help, it doesn't matter what you do. You'll never change if you're doing it for other people, if you're trying to get well for other people. Of course, I wanted to get well because I didn't want this to have to be, I felt guilty for my parents and my family that this was another thing that was wrong with me, which is what it felt like, that I was causing. Equally, you have to be like, I want to do this for myself, because that's the only way that your brain will also just like try and change the information that it's learned or known to be true till that point that's made things unhealthy for you. So then I was referred to like an eating disorder clinic, and I was told that I had anorexia, which is where you don't eat and you just want to be as light as you possibly can. And then it was me being told that I was going to have to go to an eating disorder clinic every week, and I was like, oh my god, there's no way my mum is now going to have to spend even more time on worrying about me and on me. And it was every Thursday I was being picked up from school to go to an eating disorder clinic. My mum would drive me there, and it was this really warped thing, because I was glad and relieved. It felt like this weight off my chest to like this dirty little secret I had to, it's like I cheated or something, but I hadn't. I was literally just like the person that I was doing the most disservice to was myself, and being the worst to and unkindest to towards was myself. But it felt like this thing that I'd said out loud, and I was glad that I'd said it. But then I was like, why the hell have you told people now? Because now you've completely given back that control again. And this was the one thing you had. It was like you had this one, that like devil on my shoulder was really horrible to myself when I was going through all of my eating disorder stuff. It was like the devil and the angel that you have on your shoulders. That devil was so loud. It was like really unkind to myself. That eating disorder brain warped everything. It was like, it got so bad sometimes where I was like, I'd rather like have to have another surgery than put on weight. It like completely warped my sense of reality. It was insane, honestly, looking back at. And it's like you could be as thin as can be, but you would always feel like you don't look that way. It's like looking yourself in a fun house mirror, you know, when you go to like those soft play places like Clown Town and stuff, you know, where there's those ball pits and those like fun mirrors and stuff. It's like looking at your body in a fun mirror, because an eating disorder is normally clubbed with body dysmorphia, which is when you have a completely morphed sense of reality of what you look like. And a lot of people can have it with their face or their body, or you know, things like that. A lot of men actually get it with like muscles, like muscle dysmorphia, where, you know, they never feel like they've put on enough muscle or worked out enough. And so it can manifest itself in that way a lot too. But of course, anyone can get an eating disorder. It's like anything. It doesn't matter who you are. If you think it won't happen to you, of course it can happen, especially if you lack safety and stability in your life. It's obviously like anything like that. It preys on instability and insecurity. And obviously being a child, even more, it preys on vulnerable minds. And so that's what an eating disorder does. I was so annoyed with myself because I felt like I was giving over control of this thing, and I was like, why did I even say something about it? Because now I can't, it's not my secret. I can't just lose weight in peace. I can't just not eat in peace. It became, you know, my mum making me lunch, and where I'd maybe like, oh, like go up to my room and like hide my lunch and not eat my food. It was like, no, you need to sit here and I need to watch you eat your food. So again, it was like that complete loss of control, and again, feeling like watched and examined. But I had to be, for my own safety, because I'd become so thin that it had become like unsafe, and I'd nearly had to be like hospitalized for it. And I remember I'd be weighed every week and I'd just cry, because if I'd put on weight, it was like, oh my God, like I've completely lost control again. And that was my one ounce of control I had, and it's like it felt gone. And it got so bad when it would come to like weighing time that I would have to go on weighing scales backwards, so I wasn't actually looking at the number that was on the scale. Yeah, it was really, really bad. And it was like, I remember my parents were like asked to go to a support group, and I remember my dad going, and my dad had a particularly hard time understanding why I was acting the way I was with my eating disorder. And I think it, for someone that has a healthy mindset, it is literally just, why can't you just eat? Like, why can't you just do this? Like, please. And it's like, you can't. It's like forcing anyone to do that thing and before they're able. You just can't. And so I remember my dad went to like a support group for parents of children with eating disorders, and he found that very, very difficult, because it was like, I wasn't just a child with an eating disorder, I was a child with an eating disorder and a chronic illness and like so many other issues, and it just became another thing. And you know, for that year of time that I was seeing a therapist every week, it was not even like, they were actually really great. And I think that's part of the reason why I can say now that I am where I am with like my eating disorder journey, my perspective now of my body and myself, mainly my weight, not so much my body, because I don't think my body will ever feel like a home to me. It will always feel like something that has been my enemy and has fought against me rather than with me, because of my condition and being cut into and stitched up. It will never feel like a home. It doesn't have to feel like it's also making things any worse than they have to be and that are out of your control. And so, yeah, I think that's the thing, is my dad really, really struggled with that. And I think my treatment was a lot of, because I was so young, was a lot of like, okay, if you have a circle and the circle is your life, how much of your life or your mindset would you say is consumed? If this was a pie chart, like how much is consumed by your eating disorder? And it was like 90%. Okay, how much do you want it to be consumed by your eating disorder? I don't know, like 30%. Okay, so we work towards that. The time of life then is very like blurry. I really don't remember it very well. I also just think I have amnesia to a lot of things that I've blocked out on purpose. Or that I've just, you know, there was almost too many traumatic things that have happened to me that I have to pick and choose the ones that actually stay in there. They have like a little hierarchy of how bad they were. So for me, that time, though it was traumatic and it was really, really emotionally difficult and confusing and hard, it wasn't like a life or death situation. So exactly what the treatment was, I don't really remember, but the people that looked after me there were great and were specialized in young people with eating disorders. So obviously, you know, we're experts in their field. And I think a lot of it was just talking therapy. I think this had been my secret for so long that just talking about it, you know, like anything, talking may not change the issue at hand, but it makes you feel less alone, and it makes you feel seen, and it makes you not feel so guilty. And so I think a lot of, honestly, what the treatment was just having a safe space where I didn't feel like a villain, or I felt seen and heard and not like a problem, to just talk about like how I feel and why my brain's like this, and exploring why this is, and exploring the topic of a need for safety and stability, and why that manifested in an eating disorder, and just trying to string everything together to make sense of it. Because I think when you can make sense of something happening to you, I think it makes it even easier to then treat the thing. And so I think that was the first part, is just trying to make sense of it for myself, why I got to this point. But they were really great, but it was really difficult. It was, you know, having to like have very like calorie dense like meals and calorie drinks that like felt like, again, I was like giving myself poison, because they had like, it would be like 10 mils of like liquid with like 100 calories in them, and like that felt like hell to me. And my mind got so warped that I knew like the calories in an apple, and I'm like, why am I even worrying about the calories in an apple? So it was a very, very, very hard time. But like, God, am I so glad that I admitted that I had a problem, because I do think I'm so glad that had this happened to me, it happened at the age it did, because, you know, young minds are so much more impressionable and less stuck in their ways. Then obviously the older you get, the more you're stuck in your ways, and the more, you know, habits you've learned are so much harder to unlearn and are fixated and ingrained into you. And so I do feel that like me trying to unlearn the things that I'd done, like calorie counting and not eating, and, you know, hiding my food or not eating or lying about how much I'd eaten, those were easier to, once I tried to tell myself this is for the best and this is for my own well-being, like once the negative spiral of you've handed over control, why have you done this to yourself, blah blah blah, that went, I feel like I was so much in a better place as a child going through an eating disorder than an adult, because of the fact that, one, I was, you know, lucky to be able to quite quickly see someone for treatment, because I think I was, you know, severely underweight, that it was like, you need to see someone now. But equally, yeah, I think the older you get, like anything, the harder and more stuck in your ways you get. And so if there's anything I have to be grateful for, it's just that it happened the way it did, and that my parents, even if they didn't understand, because it's a really, really, really hard thing to understand if you haven't had that mindset before, tried their best, you know. And that's the support network in anything in life is all you could ask for. But, you know, we live in a world that praises control and praises discipline without asking what it's hiding and seeing those all as healthy things. And we praise shrinking without recognizing that sometimes shrinking is a symptom and not a goal. And we normalize disordered habits all the time, little rules, little jokes, little regimented things we do, comments that seem harmless but create background noise for illness and something that can hide in plain sight, you know. And so when a child starts reaching for control, it doesn't always look like a red flag. Sometimes it looks like being good, like, you know, being healthy or being strong or being fine, or anyone does. But it can make it even more complicated and dangerous. You know, like I said, my personality changed and I didn't even realize at the time. I was so warped mentally. I became short, I became snappy, I became just quiet and reserved, because, you know, it wasn't me being a suddenly like horrible person. I just was not myself, and my mum could see it more than anyone. She knew me and knows me better than anyone. It was literally just because my body had no energy. It had no fuel to function normally. So I couldn't either. You know, it's like when you've had a bad night's sleep and you're shorter. It's like that, but every single day, because you don't have enough fuel to function. And you can't run on an empty brain all the time and expect it to be kind and patient to yourself and others. And it was running on, essentially. So yeah, it got so bad to the point that my school had to also step in, and I was asked to eat my lunch in a separate room, and so that when I wasn't at home, my teacher could track what I was eating. And I can only speak for myself, but yeah, with disordered eating, it makes you so secretive and it makes you hide, and you start lying because you're trying to protect your illness. And that was never me. Like, that was never Nikki. I wasn't a sneaky kid. I wasn't a secretive person. But the illness turns you into someone you don't recognize, like anything like that. You know, I made excuses. I'm not hungry. I've already eaten. I got school dinners. Anything to stop people looking too closely, like my mom. Like, my mom could tell, though, that, you know, I thought I was being clever, but she could see it all, you know. She noticed that when I'd say, oh, I've got school dinners, my money from my finger hadn't left the account in like a year, because I didn't like school dinners at the best of times. Like, oh, I've suddenly like got this newfound love for school dinners every day. She could see on the back end, like, oh, I probably need to, like, she'd say like, oh, I probably need to fill up, you know, your account with a bit more money then if you're eating school dinners. I hadn't eaten a thing. And it's, yeah, then the planning starts. And I remember going, like, if we were going out for someone's birthday, instead of being excited, I'd be anxious. I'd rehearse the menu in my head like I was studying. And if what I planned wasn't on the menu, and it was always the thing that I didn't actually want, it was just the one that I thought would be healthiest or lowest in like calories. And if it wasn't on the menu, or they like didn't have it last minute, I could not cope. And that's when you realize it's not control anymore. You think that's the thing with an eating disorder, is you think you're in control, but it is controlling you. With any illness like that, you are not in control. You think you've got that control and it's yours, but it's just controlling you. That's all it is. And there was another layer to it, because obviously, you know, with my surgeries and things, it's like what had felt like it had become my control in those in-betweens and in those times where I needed it the most. It wasn't, you know? And yeah, eating disorders are incredibly serious and something to not be taken lightly. And it got so bad at my worst, to the point that I also think, where I got so frightened that it was the real trajectory of me trying to get better and saying like, I need to get better for myself. It got so serious that it started affecting my medical treatment. I remember being told by my doctors, my parents were told actually on my 12th birthday, that I needed to be medically stable. Otherwise, my surgery that I was supposed to have couldn't go ahead, because I was very close to being admitted to hospital for treatment for my anorexia. It was so bad. And recovery isn't pretty. It isn't aesthetic. There was so much crying. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of frustration. You know, I would often just like walk out of my sessions crying and just be silent on the way home. It's uncomfortable. It's scary. It involves monitoring diet plans, calorie drinks, crying in therapy, being watched, support groups. And it felt like the wheel had been taken from my hands. And at times I felt like I was losing the only thing. But looking back, that secret wasn't the only thing, and it wasn't even my thing in the first place. It wasn't protecting me, it was hurting me. So yeah, I think that is what I wanted to talk about, is, you know, control in life can be a great thing, and we can build that in the time we wake up, the time we go to bed, our relationships with others, and having control in protecting your peace and things like that. But this isn't control that you ever need in your life. It's only control that makes things harder for you. And I carried so much guilt. It felt like another problem I had to deal with, and another thing added to the pile. And I hated causing stress. And even when, you know, I hated causing the stress, and I didn't know how to get myself out of that cycle. And sometimes people do praise the wrong things that can only ever fuel what you're already struggling with, you know. And so if they're praising you and saying you look good or you look really well, it only adds fuel to the fire. I think if there's one piece of advice I could give you as someone, as just a human, is don't ever make comments about like, oh, have you lost weight? Or like, oh, you look really good, you look really healthy, because you never know what someone is going through underneath that, and it could be so much more than what it seems on the surface. Unhealthy control is slowly just trying to keep your feet above water when you're quietly drowning. And eating disorders do not make you better. Anything like that never makes you better. It just makes you smaller. They take your time, your joy, your spontaneity, your, you know, things that make your life feel full and rich, your relationships with others, because I began to like resent my parents because I was, you know, they were trying to look after me and make me better. But I was like, you're doing this to me. You're also part of the problem of taking my control away from me. They take away your ability to be present. Something that should be fun, like going out for a meal, becomes something you dread. And they steal your personality and your quality of life and call it achievement. And so my thought of the week is that for me, my lesson is that food is never the enemy and your body needs it. So if you're struggling at the moment with, you know, even if it's not necessarily an eating disorder, but it's just, you know, feeling like, oh no, I can't have that extra slice of cake today, or oh no, I better not. I better be good. Especially, you know, as we've come into a new year, I feel like that mindset is more than ever. Oh, I shouldn't. I'm trying to be good. You know, we all grow up around it, even if we don't do it to ourselves. Maybe our mum does it, and you're around that negative self-talk, and it impacts you. A lot of people do it unknowingly and with no bad intent, but it can all affect and plant seeds. Fuel is only there to fuel your body. It's like operating through your day on 0% charge if you don't have food. Food is fuel, and it is safety, and it's important. You can't function without it. But rewiring your brain to truly believe that, for me, was so incredibly difficult. It was the hardest part, I think, that to learn that food is my friend and is not my enemy. So this week, if you can, try to ask yourself one gentle question. When the voice of control shows up, in whatever it may be, it may not manifest itself in food and eating disorder, like, you know, traits, but whatever it may be, and just that controlling voice in your head that isn't helpful and it is negative self-talk, ask yourself, what am I actually needing right now? Not what do I need to prove? Not what does the number say? You know, what do I need? Do you need safety? Do you need reassurance? Do you need rest, support, consistency? A moment where your nervous system can just unclench for even just a moment. Control is often a message and not a personality flaw. And I think I've realized that you can seek control in so many different ways that don't have to be unhealthy. Your body goes to that because it feels like the last resort when, you know, it's almost hard to think of anything in your life that could be a healthy means of control, and it grabs onto things like that in survival mode. But if I've learned anything, it's that I'm learning that even in the lack of control, you can find types of moments of control or things you control, even in the most mundane thing. It could be like going for a walk off your own accord, or choosing what you know, trying not to make them about measurements, but about things that you choose to do for yourself. Spending time with friends, what you pick to do when you hang out, what film you watch. Those are all control. It may not feel like it, and they may feel like mundane, stupid things to be like, yeah, I picked a film for us to watch. How is that control? But what I learned is control should never be to do with measurement, because that's when it's a slippery slope, and it should just be, you know, to do with having autonomy over decisions. And for me, I think I've learned that even if I can, in the smallest way, take up and take back some of that space in my life for control and authority that I never felt like I had over my life, then that is how you slowly heal, essentially rewiring and relearning. And it's a slippery slope. You know, I'd be lying if I didn't say there's days now where I'm like, oh no, I shouldn't eat that. It's, you know, it feels like I don't feel good after I eat certain things, and I don't think about it and have that like crop up of like, oh, because I ate that today, tomorrow I should eat a bit less, not eat that, eat this, or like, oh, I ate too much bread today. So fucking what? You're human. Life is short. Life is hard enough. And you need these things to make your life easier. Food is a need. It's not a want. We all need it to survive. And so for me, I've learned to just try my best to be kind to myself, because the voice you hear in your head and on your shoulder is the one you hear all the time. So trying to rewire negative self-talk is like the hardest and most important part. But yeah, I'm really grateful and lucky that I got treatment young, even though at times it felt like hell and I felt like giving up. Eating disorders isolate you, and anything like that does. They shrink your world. They stop you from enjoying life and trying new things. And I'd be lying if I said that niggle doesn't show up, but now I can push through, and that is where you should be proud of yourself. And I can make those thoughts smaller instead of letting them make me smaller. Food is not the enemy. We deserve it and we need it. And yeah, I'm trying to learn new healthy outlets and ways to express and regain that control and reclaim it, because they are out there. It's just hard to see it in the midst of a really dark period. But yeah, thank you for sitting with me through this one. I feel like for me, this is something I've wanted to talk about for a long time, because for a long time it felt like this dirty secret that I didn't talk about. I've talked about every single facet of my life and the ins and outs of my health and depression and every little part of my life. I was an open book, and this felt like something I was almost embarrassed to talk about and ashamed to talk about. And I've learned that, you know, it's nothing to be ashamed of at all. That's what an eating disorder makes you feel as well, is shame. And so trying to override that feeling of shame into like, it is nothing to be ashamed of, has been really healing and important for me too on my journey, and same for you, whatever it may be, in whatever way you've been affected by control taking, unhealthy, manifestations in your body. An eating disorder essentially is a form of self-harm. It's doing no good to yourself but harm, and like any form of self-harm, it helps no one, especially not yourself. And though it may feel like the only safety net you have, I promise you it's not your safety net. But know that if you resonated or struggled with any of this that I'm thinking of, you can always, get through it and get to the other side. I'm an example of that. It isn't easy, it isn't fun, it isn't great, it's no, butterflies and rainbows, but it is possible. And yeah, I love you. Thank you for watching, and as always, say it with me, especially after this episode: look after yourself, and always remember to be kind to yourself and live a little.